Hello everyone and welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Stephanie and today I'm going to be showing you how to make these bow scrunchies. Me and my mom have been making these scrunchies for about a year and a half now with our business called Little Lux Designs. You can follow us on Facebook or on Instagram where you can purchase these scrunchies if you choose not to make them. But yeah, to start out, I'm showing you how to use this Christmas fabric to make a scrunchie. I thought it was only fitting to do some Christmas ones since we're about 2 weeks away from Christmas, and these would be really great gifts for family members, sister, aunt, mom. So yeah, to start off, I'm showing you this picture here with all the measurements you will need and things you will need. So you'll need an elastic that is 8 inches long. You will need a piece of fabric that is 4 inches by 9 inches, and that will be used for the bow. And then you will also need a piece of fabric that is 4 inches by 18 inches, and that will be just the round part of your scrunchie. Depending on how thick or thin your hair is, you can make the elastic smaller to bunch up the fabric a bit more. But yeah, let's get into the video. You will also need a pair of scissors, a needle and thread if you choose to do it that way. I will be using a sewing machine as I do these for a living and definitely couldn't be sewing them all by hand. So here I'm just showing you the sewing machine I use, and what you're going to do is you're going to take your fabric and you're going to fold it in half. So I have all these different patterns here. I'm going to show you this step using this cute mitten Christmas fabric. So you have the two pieces like in the beginning, and what you're going to do is you can either iron them. If you don't have an iron, you can just fold them over. So what you do is you fold them in half, and this part here is going to be the bow on the top. So you're going to sew it on a diagonal from the corner almost to the top, and then you're going to sew across. Then you're going to leave a gap, and then you're going to sew again on the same cross and then on diagonal to the corner. On the second piece, which is going to be the scrunchie itself, you're going to do the same thing. So here I'm showing you it's just the flat piece like in the beginning in the picture, and then I'm going to fold that piece in half. You can iron the seams flat if you choose to. It does make it easier. And you're going to leave a little bit of a gap at the top like I'm showing there, and then you're going to sew all the way down right to the end. Again, up and over for this one. Leave a nice big gap because you're going to need to turn these right side in, and then all the way down again to the side. Here I am starting to sew it, so I'm taking the big piece. The first thing I'm doing is folding over that little piece that I told you not to sew, just so I have a marker of where I want to do it. Then I'm going to put that in the sewing machine, and I'm going to start at the end of that fold, and I'm going to sew all the way down on the open seam. If you had a needle and thread, you could do that way as well. This just makes it a whole lot easier, but I know a lot of people don't have a sewing machine. So I'm putting that in on the presser foot, and I'm just sewing straight down with about 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance. So here I'm sewing, then I'm going to stop and, oh, the camera moved a little bit, so I'm going to stop, do a little bit of a back stitch, and then sew all the way down and back stitch at the end again. Alrighty guys, so I repositioned the camera, and like I said, we're starting at the top there, just leaving a little bit of a gap. You're going to back stitch and sew all the way down the open seam. You want to try and keep a straight line as much as possible, but at the same time, if you go a little bit wonky, it's not too big of a deal because the fabric is going to be bunched up at the end, so you won't really see the seam. It's just a good idea to make sure there's not any holes in it. I'm not the best sewer, but I have had quite a few years of experience. So yeah, I'm just cutting the threads off now. The most important thing is to backstitch, as otherwise your seams will just fall apart. So now that I have it like that, we're going to turn it right side in. I'm showing you this tool here, which I don't use until the end, but it's also not necessary to have that. So what we're doing now is we're flipping this long tube right side in, so that way the fabric is on the outside. And then I'm going to show you what we're going to do with that end piece that we did not sew. This part is a little bit finicky. It's probably the most tedious part of making these scrunchies, but yeah, you just have to fiddle with it. Most of the time I just put my finger inside of the fabric and just roll it out. I'm just listening to some music here just to keep me sane as I'm rolling these in. A lot of the times I do 50 to 60 of these at a time. They're a lot of fun to make, especially when you use lots of different fabrics. But yeah, normally I would sew all of them and then I would turn all of them right side in. So I have a lot of experience with doing these. So once I am good with that, now I'm showing you that end piece that we did not sew, just that small piece. We're gonna roll that inside. That's gonna create a nice seam, so that way when we turn this into a continuous circle, we will put the raw edge from the other side inside of that. That way there's no fraying. Next, I'm showing you this piece, which is going to be your bow, and like I said, you're going to sew on a diagonal from the corners all the way up. Here I'm showing you from the folded side all the way down, leaving a gap and doing the same thing on the other side. It's very important that you leave that gap, otherwise you won't be able to turn your fabric right side in. So I'm sewing, making sure to back stitch and then lift the presser foot up and keep sewing down the side. Using about 1/4 inch seam allowance as well for this. So now I'm taking it off, I'm gonna cut the threads, and then I will sew the same way on the other side, leaving a gap. Alrighty, so I'm just showing you how I sewed that. Hopefully you can see since I use white thread. I'd also like to mention that you don't have to use white thread. If you were using a dark fabric, you could use a navy or black. Depending on what colors are in your fabric, you could choose any color of the rainbow. I just stick with white because I do this for a business, and it does take a lot of time to switch the fabrics and threads in and out. So yeah, having to rethread the machine every time you use a different color would be kind of annoying, so I like to stick with white. I'm just showing you that I left that gap there so there's a nice hole in the center to flip it right side in. But before we do that, we're going to need to snip the corners so that way when we poke the corners through, they'll be nice and sharp. So I'm cutting on a diagonal, not trying to cut the seams here, otherwise you will have a hole, and then you're cutting a little snip of a triangle off the corner there. Doing the same thing to the other side, and then we are able to turn it right side in. Once you have something that looks like this, take your fingers and put them into the center hole and flip. The main thing here is that you're going to need some kind of tool to point in the corners to make it nice and sharp and look like a bow. I'm using my scissors, but you could use anything you'd like that's nice and pointy. Just remember to not poke it too far through your fabric. This is why we cut the edges off here, because once we point the edges or the corners out, you will have trouble if there's too much fabric there. If you forgot to cut that off, you could easily just flip it right back inside. Also, it's not too big of a deal if you choose not to flip it. You just won't have those crisp points. Doing that to both sides. Once that is done, I'm then going to sew that open seam in the center. Alrighty, so now that I have the fabric turned right side in, I have some nice crisp points. I'm then going to sew up that seam that I left open for turning right side in. Make sure to backstitch on both sides, and I like to sew a little bit over the seam on either side just to make sure there's no holes. Once I take it off the machine, I'm then going to snip as close as possible and to make sure that there's no threads, as this is going to be the outside, so you don't want any loose seams. Alrighty, so once I've used my scissors and snipped all of those loose threads to make it nice and seamless, I'm then going to grab my tool called the Clip and Glide Bodkin. Now this tool is not necessary, but it is a lifesaver. I purchased this tool on Amazon for $15. I actually saw it on TikTok. Somebody was making scrunchies on there and showed this tool and recommended it, so I purchased it, of course. But yeah, before I used to use a safety pin, or I would just put my elastic on the end of my seam ripper and just thread it through that way. But if you're making a bunch of these, you want to make them for gifts, I definitely would recommend buying this tool. it's a lifesaver. So what I do is I just wrap the elastic around my 4 fingers, and that's usually enough size for your hair, but 8 inches I definitely would recommend, as in the beginning where I showed in the picture, but this is normally what I do. I just eyeball it, and I'm just showing here, I'm just measuring it just to make sure it's the 8 inches for the purpose of the video. Once I have it like that, I'm then going to clip it into the bodkin. It's a really simple tool. Here I'm trying to figure out how I use it. This is the first time using it. So it clips it into the top. Then you secure it. And you're not going to put that end in first. You're going to want to put the pointy end through your fabric, sorry. So thread the fabric through. Keep a hold of the elastic on the other end, and then you're going to hold the other piece to the other side and unclip it, and that way it's all the way through your piece of fabric. Once you have it to that side, you can unclip it, but keep a hold of it, otherwise it will go right back through again. And you're going to tie this in a knot. I like to double knot it, but you can also just single knot it. It all depends on how tight you're able to make the knot. I always give a big tug on it to really see if I'm gonna stretch it around my hair. I wanna see it's gonna work and it's not gonna come loose. You could also sew it, but I used to sew it in the beginning and honestly feel like the knot works the best. So once I did that, I clipped the end of it, and then you're gonna roll the knot into the open side that you didn't fold in your fabric, and then you're going to take the raw seam that's there and you're going to put it into that folded little piece that you did, and that's going to make a nice seamless continuous loop. Once I have that like that and it's nice and flat, we're going to put that in the sewing machine and sew across that seam to make the loop. So you're going to put it in there, put your presser foot down, sew, back stitch, sew all the way down, and that way you can get it off without having to try and maneuver it. I like to sew all the way back up so that way you're not pulling it off with the seam in between the loop. Now cut all of your threads off, making sure that it's nice and clean because this is going to be the outside of your scrunchie. Now, if you're not the best sewer, this is where the bow is going to go. So if your lines are a little bit wonky, it's not going to show. Once you have it like that, you're then going to take your bow, and what you're going to do is fold the top of the scrunchie, just to make it a bit simpler. Fold that over, and then you're going to thread the bow piece into the middle of the scrunchie, and you're going to tie it in just a little knot. Just do it once, making sure to fix it so that way that knot is over top of the seam, and then you're just going to fix the bow so it's nice and pointy, and there we go. That is your scrunchie. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this easy tutorial, and I'd love to see pictures of your scrunchies that you make in the comments. Hopefully these are some great Christmas gifts for your family. Thanks so much. Bye.